Reflecting on the world we live in, women over the years have had to fight to get equal representation in films and TV. In the early days of cinema, films regularly relied on female archetypes that portrayed women as weak, inferior, and unintelligent. In this video essay, we will examine how has the representation of women in films and TV changed over time. Women's representation in film has evolved significantly from 1910 to the present. In 1910, women were often relegated to stereotypical roles that were subservient to males, such as the damsel in distress or the ingenue, reflecting societal norms and expectations of that time. At this time, the film industry was portraying women as glorified beauty objects, symbolizing sex appeal, all to encourage the male gaze. Another problem we often see in films is the sexualization of women and young girls. It is said that women are 4 times more likely to be shown undressed in films than men.
Would you be shocked if I put on something more comfortable?
I'll try to survive.
However, as women started gaining more agency in society through things like the success of the suffragette movement, their representation in film began to change. In the 1930s, women started to gain more substantial roles in films within genres like comedies and musicals. Actresses like Katharine Hepburn and Bette Davis were known for their strong and independent characters who challenged gender norms, as seen in movies like Little Women, Dark Victory, and The Philadelphia Story.
Come around about noon tomorrow. I mean today. Snob.
What do you mean, snob?
You're the worst kind there is, an intellectual snob.
Also behind the screen, a few female screenwriters and directors, such as Lois Weber and Dorothy Arzner, making significant contributions to the industry as writers, directors, and producers. In the 1950s and 1960s, women's representation in film continued to evolve. The rise of feminism and the civil rights movement brought attention to the lack of diversity and representation in the film industry. Women began to demand more agency and representation in front of and behind the camera. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot further challenged gender norms and portrayed women as more assertive and having their own thoughts that aren't surrounded by men. Although these films did challenge these stereotypes, these films in particular are still showcasing the female lead as eye candy for the male-dominated audience. As the agency and power of women evolved and was more accepted into society, the voice of female actors, writers, producers, and directors and their stories evolved too. Let's take a look at how their representation changed in modern media. In a 2022 report published by the Center of the Study of Women in Television and Film called It's a Man's Celluloid World, Portrayals of the Female Characters in the Top Grossing US Films of 2022, states that men outnumber women 2-to-1 in the movies. They also found that in the top grossing films of 2022, only 33% of films featured female protagonists, women comprised 38% of major characters, females accounted for 37% of all speaking characters, 80% of films featured more male than female characters, only 11% of films had more female than male characters. Female protagonists were more likely to appear in horror features, followed by dramas and action features, whereas male protagonists were more likely to appear in action features, followed by dramas and comedies. Although these statistics may look negative, it is actually an improvement from previous years, and these numbers are slowly but continuously increasing. Some film genres are more representative of women than others. For example, some films within the horror genre. The traditional tropes of horror films typically focus on the negative treatment of women. However, there are some moments of resistance that allow for strong female representation. Some of these female characters step beyond the traditional stereotypes and emerge as feminist role models. For example, the character Ellen Ripley from the 1979 film Alien and its 1986 sequel, Aliens. Throughout the franchise, Ripley's character was constantly challenged but, and I quote, She didn't throw her hands up and wait for someone to save her. She was a thinking, moving, deciding creature. Ripley also battled not only with fighting an alien, but she was also fighting some deeply emotional challenges. For example, her maternal instincts in Aliens. Because of this, Ripley was considered a strong feminine icon, and her character was someone women could not only relate to, but also be inspired by.
Hello.
Another example of this is in the Scream franchise. The first Scream movie, which was premiered in 1996, was full of anti-feminist stereotypes, from the virgin final girl to the masculine predator to the sexual scream queen. However, some of these stereotypes got flipped in Scream 4, as one of the Ghostface killers was female, which opened up the possibility of women as murderers in slasher films. As internationally renowned feminist media scholar Kathleen Rowe Carlin wrote, there are real fears about the damaging effects of popular culture and young people, with worries about violence focused on boys and sex on girls. Girls are forced into being objects that represent sex, beauty, and innocence, despite these being contrasting ideals. Rarely has a woman in slasher films been depicted as having her own means of violence or her own power. Overall, the Scream franchise is an example of feminist ideals in the newer films and anti-feminist stereotypes in the original films. While the first films of the franchise relied on the typical horror ideas of virgin final girls, promiscuous victims, and the male violence against them both, the franchise evolved over time to become more complex. Today, Sidney Prescott and even Gale Weathers are feminist icons that have become fully realised women in horror with imperfections, values, and their own power. Another point of reference for these films having feminist ideals is that Alien and Scream franchises both passed the Bechdel test, 3 for 3. But what is the Bechdel test? The Bechdel test first appeared in a 1985 comic strip of Dykes to Watch Out For, a long-running comic by cartoonist and writer Alison Bechdel. The comic depicts two queer women discussing movies. One says she will only see a film if it meets a certain set of requirements involving female characters. The Bechdel test we see now is a series of 3 rules designed to assess the presence of women in movies. According to the original comic, the 3 rules are: the movie must have at least 2 women in it, the women must talk to each other, and their discussion must be about something other than a man. Recently, critics have reassessed the test and have added more extra rules. The female characters should be named, say more than 5 words to each other, and share more than a minute of screen time. There are still many films being made that unfortunately don't pass the Bechdel test. Some of these films include Breakfast at Tiffany's, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Avengers, and Pacific Rim. However, along with Alien and the Scream franchise, there are many films that do pass the test. For example, Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2, Frozen, Mad Max Fury Road, Hidden Figures, Wonder Woman, and Coda.
Settle down, are you kidding? I'm at the top of my game. I'm right up there with the big dogs. Girls, come on. Leave the saving the world to the men? I don't think so. I don't think so.
In summary, the representation of women in film has improved over the last century or so. And although there is still frequent glimmers of stereotypes that the industry needs to shake off, it seems there is a possible brighter future on the horizon. A female 007 or superheroes in film is welcome, but our research shows that there are exceptions and not the rule. The bigger picture is that the gender discrimination and harmful stereotypes still dominate on screen. We need to stop the sexualization and the objectification of women and girls on screen and everywhere else.